Okay, so think, okay, so I think it is recording, right? All right, we can get started. I'll continue to admit people as they're coming in.
I guess we're trying to. Hi, welcome. I'm Lori Collier with the California Opportunity Youth Network, and thank you for bearing with our rescheduling and happy to see you here today. As we get going, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to kind of dive into the policy update. But if you have questions as he's going, please feel free to type them in the chat. And so as we get going in the transition, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and your organization and where you are in California, that would be super helpful just to orient everyone who's on the call today. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Sean to get us started.
Great. Hi, everybody. And yes, thank you for bearing with us with the rescheduling. I had a wicked bout of bronchitis that is almost gone now, so hopefully I won't be hacking, but if I do, I'll try to hit the mute button so you're spared. Um, if you want to go to the next slide, Melissa, we have kind of three parts to the agenda today. Um, First, I'm going to talk about the governor's budget that was released last month and just give some real high-level overview of where things stand with the budgeting process in the state. Secondly, I'm going to review the results that we got from our annual policy survey that went out to the membership late last year. And a special thank you to all of you who submitted results to that. And then lastly, we're going to do a review of COYN's policy agenda for 2025, both our state policy agenda and our federal policy agenda. And maybe Melissa or Lori, if you want to throw the PDF of the policy agenda in the chat as well, just so folks have the document they can reference going forward, that would be great. So why don't we move forward and we'll start with the state budget. So the California state budget kicks off in January every year. The governor releases his proposed budget, and that gives us a sense of where the state is at in terms of its fiscal health, and it gives the legislature an understanding of the governor's priorities for the budgeting for the coming year. The good news is the state is out of deficit for the first time in a couple years. We have had a bit of a whiplash with the state's budget the last several years. 3 years ago, we had a massive surplus, then we swung to a massive deficit, and now we're kind of stabilized, which is a good news. It means that we're not going to have to find any major cuts, but the operating surplus is very minimal. It's only 363 million. To put that in perspective, it was 65 billion a few years ago. So what that means is we're largely looking at a status quo budgeting cycle. It's going to be very hard to secure new resources to launch new programs that haven't already been funded in the prior cycles. So that'll make, program expansion a challenge. But unlike the last couple of years, we shouldn't have to defend against any major cuts. So it's a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news. The good news, further good news is that the state's fiscal health looks to be improving year by year, and we should be coming out of the worst of it here. The state has also put aside $17 billion into reserves to help guard against any sort of, sharp downturns in revenue collection. The other thing that I'll say, and this has really sort of been reinforced since the governor put out his budget, is that there's a ton of uncertainty happening at the federal level, as I'm sure you've all read about in the news headlines. The Trump administration has put temporary funding freezes and then removed them, and they're kind of monkeying around with a lot of funding at that level, much of which flows through the state and then goes out through various state programs. So there's a lot of uncertainty that's going to be kind of undercutting the process this year, and I think it's going to make it really hard for them again, to be confident in making an investments, not knowing how reliable some of the federal funding will be in the next year that California has been counting on. So that's sort of a high-level overview of the budget. The next process in the budgeting cycle is the legislature starts to write its budget. The committees will start having hearings here in the next few weeks. and the legislature will start putting together the framework for its budget. In May, the governor will introduce his May budget revision, which gives another updated snapshot as to where the state's fiscal situation is. And then by June, the governor and the legislature finalize the budgeting process, and they lock it in. So that's sort of where things are at now, where things are going. Again, just knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty in the process this year, given everything that's happening federally. Next slide. There were a few, despite it being mostly a status quo budget, there were a few new initiatives that were worth highlighting, I think, for this network. The first is that there's resources included to implement the governor's master plan for career education. You guys may remember that the governor put out an executive order in August 2023 calling for the development of this master plan for career education that initiated a pretty extensive process across multiple agencies and with multiple stakeholders to develop the framework for this master plan. The initial draft of the master plan included no references to Opportunity Youth. We were really disappointed by that. And fortunately, the OY community was pretty loud in its pushback against that. After they released their initial framework, the sponsoring entities of this process had a bunch of public forums. Many of our members, COYN members, and partners showed up at those public meetings and loudly called for Opportunity Youth to be prioritized in the master plan, and it worked. And so in December 2024, at the end of the year, the governor's office issued an updated framework document. We can throw that in the chat as well. Maybe Lori or Melissa can grab that while I'm talking. But the good news is they actually call out in the framework document that they heard from the OY community loudly. And there are multiple references to OY specifically, and calling out the need to develop specific OY strategies in workforce training, as well as in increasing the accessibility and affordability of education and training. So now we're seeing our advocacy reflected. They are calling out Opportunity Youth as a population of focus. Again, the framework document that they issued at the end of last year, I think it's like a 6 to 8 page document. So it's a really high level summary of what this larger plan will be calling for. The details will be in the final plan, which we expect to be released in the next several months. But again, we're seeing progress here in terms of the administration recognizing Opportunity Youth as a key population to focus on in this whole planning process. In the governor's budget itself, there are resources to implement the master plan. There is $100 million to expand the credit for prior learning and to develop what they're calling the career passport for young people. It's sort of like a resume that documents skills and is transferable across schools and across employers. And it's a way for young people to document their marketable skills and abilities in order to seek and find employment. So there's a lot of resources there to develop that career passport and to implement it. There's also some resources for statewide planning and coordination of the master plan rollout and for regional coordination as well. So again, I think in a very difficult budget year, it shows that this is still a high priority of the administration for them to find $100 million to roll out this career passport concept, and put it in the budget. Next slide, please. The other couple of things that we noticed that were in the state budget that the governor is proposing that are considered new funding and expansion of current funding are additional funding for the Rising Scholars Network, which is a program that provides resources to community colleges to create dedicated programming and support services for students with justice system involvement to help them attain credentials and degrees. And there's also $17 million to expand the CalRise program, which was developed a few years ago and is a statewide model of LA Rise, which provides financial and technical assistance to employment social enterprises around the state to create new career pathway opportunities. So those were the big things in the state budget. Again, the state budget was pretty much a status quo budget this year, but I think those were three areas of progress that COYN will probably lend support to. And fortunately, there are no cuts that we need to play defense against for this year. Next slide. So then we, again, towards the end of last year, released our annual policy survey. This goes out to all of the members. And we ask a number of questions trying to identify what are you seeing at the ground level? What are the challenges young people are experiencing? What do you want to see COYN lead on? What are you leading on? What are the best practices out there? And it really informs the development of our policy agenda each year. It's really important for us to hear from those of you working directly with young people around the state. So first of all, we had 17 respondents. So thank you to the 17 organizations who submitted the survey. We got a lot of great information and data. On the screen, you'll see some of the recurring themes that we saw from people's feedback, which again, when I go to the policy agenda section, you'll see how this informs what we prioritize to focus on. So we heard a lot of people talk about WIOA, how it's a critical funding stream in the system, how they want to see COYN continue to do a lot of advocacy on that. We heard a lot about the importance of earn and learn opportunities, including apprenticeships. Again, an area that COYN's done a lot of work over the last several years. Folks want to see us continue engage in that space and lead on those issues. We did hear that members are interested in finding out more information from COYN about a couple of opportunities. One are emerging funding opportunities. So we're going to try to do a better job of letting you know when there are RFPs coming out from the state and new programs that network members might be able to secure funding from, as well as opportunities for COYN members to engage in direct advocacy. That's something we've wanted to do for a while. We've sort of been a victim of our own success in some ways, in that some of our policies have been so popular and haven't been opposed that they've been kind of voice voting them and expediting them through the process. And you never say no to that because it moves things through quickly and under the radar. But it does limit the opportunity for like public testimony and those kinds of things. But we will try to be more creative about making sure that our network members and the young people they work with continue to have opportunities to engage in direct advocacy. And we might want to think creatively about using videos and things like that to put people's voices forward. We also heard a lot about the importance of employer partnerships, and that's an area I think where COYN can do more leadership on in our work around apprenticeships. This is something we're really looking at strengthening. And we have some of our stronger members have a lot of expertise in this field, so we might think about how to elevate some of the work they're doing. We heard that folks want us to leverage existing programs to create within them new pathways for opportunity youth, in particular looking at AmeriCorps programming and the high road training partnerships that have been rolled out around the state. Those have been on our radar for a while, where we continue to be frustrated that the HRTP programs have not been very youth focused. So that'll be an area we spend some time on this year. Heard a lot about focusing on emerging and high demand industries, making sure that young people are created pathways into areas where the jobs will be in the coming years. And then, which we hear every year and continue to make this an ongoing priority, is the importance of support services being available to young people to help them enroll in and maintain and complete programs. So those were some of the recurring themes from the policy survey. And again, thank you to everyone who took the time to submit all that information. It's really helpful for our planning. Lastly, the policy agenda. And I think somebody threw the actual document in the chat, but I'm going to go through at a high level what we're going to be working on this year for 2025. And so what you see on the screen there is our state policy agenda. The first thing is our continued work around WIOA. I think many of you know we worked really hard at the federal level on a WIOA reauthorization. The final bill included a number of priorities that we had been pushing for years, and it made it all the way into the final budget only to be removed at the last second, which was incredibly frustrating to us. The good news is that the House and Senate and both parties signed off on that language, and we don't get a sense that that any new disagreements have emerged around any of the language they signed off on last year. So there's a decent chance that they will look to reauthorize WIOA again early this year. But until that is reauthorized, we will continue to work on the waiver that we have had in place for several years. And so that waiver is up for reauthorization at the end of the program year in June 30th. So as long as the statute is what it is and the reauthorization is not passed, we will work on another 1-year extension of that waiver, making sure that boards have the opportunity to opt in, to leverage the flexibility it provides to serve systems involved youth, whether they're in school or out of school. We're also at a critical point of the waiver. I think we'll be going into year 5 now. And so we are working with the folks at New Ways to Work and Ari, the lead researcher there, on an evaluation report of the waiver. And we're going to be sharing the impact that it's had, both quantitatively across the boards that have opted in and qualitatively in terms of spotlighting how some of the boards have used the flexibility to really develop innovative programming for systems involved youth. So stay tuned for the waiver report. We're waiting on some state data to be sent to us, but we're hoping to finish that up in the next few months as well. We continue to make cross-system planning for OY a major priority. Sorry. That will take 2 forms this year. A couple of years ago, we passed ACR 16, which requires the state to develop a comprehensive plan for serving opportunity youth. That plan has still not been developed. Not long after we passed that, the governor put out his executive order on the master plan, and that sort of swallowed all the energy in state agencies and took all of the time. So we're now working on alignment of the two. We're working on finalizing the master plan, making sure that final report includes very clear and dedicated strategies for serving opportunity youth. And then we plan to work with the state agencies to issue the report called for in ACR 16 to supplement the master plan and to give even more clear direction for how to serve opportunity youth. So we've had to pivot a little bit in terms of moving from just a one-off plan to now a plan integrated with a broader vision. But the master plan, I think, is helpful in the sense that it's gathering a lot of energy and interest in moving career planning forward. And so we can, I think, benefit from some of that momentum. We're going to continue working on the California Youth Apprenticeship Program. We created that program a few years ago in the budget cycle. Last year, the first round of grants went out to for competition. They're called the COYA grants, California Opportunity Youth Apprenticeship Grants. We were happy to see that I think 6 or 7 of our COYN members were awarded in the first round of funding. So the second round of those grants will be going out later this year. So we will keep you guys posted when we hear notice that the solicitation is going out, but encourage all of our members, of course, to apply for those resources as well. In addition to the second round of funding that's going out for that program, we are working with several partners, including the California Edge Coalition, Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and Unite LA, on legislation to basically institutionalize the youth apprenticeship program. All this was created through the budget and was resourced, which is great, but we need to take time to actually create this thing within systems, to build bridges between education and career, and to create, the right space for this program to live within the existing infrastructure. And so we're going to be working on introducing legislation to implement a number of the recommendations that came out of the California Youth Apprenticeship Steering Committee, including creating a career apprenticeship bridge program that merges CTE and youth apprenticeships, working on employer engagement and employer incentives, funding intermediaries to work with the system and to work with employers, and also resourcing positions at state agencies to ensure ongoing coordination and alignment and oversight of this program. So we have sort of a framework of a bill right now. We have a sponsor, Assemblymember Fong, and we'll be rolling out text for that bill in the coming months. We're also working with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards at the state level, who is overseeing this program to develop that legislative language. And then lastly, we're going to work to sustain funding for the Californians for All youth programs. Those were developed a couple of years ago with with federal funds through the American Rescue Plan Act. The governor proposed continuing that program even when the federal resources went away through some state investments last year. And so we're going to make sure that that program continues to be funded as it's an important resource for workforce programming for young people in cities and counties around the state. So that's our state policy agenda for 2025. And then lastly, and then I'm happy to open it up to questions, is our federal policy agenda. I mentioned WIOA, and again, we sort of got it to the 1 yard line and we're just about finished with it until everything fell apart at the last second. But we are continuing to advocate with congressional staff to bring that bill back up and to pass it early this session. There were a number of provisions that we worked on that were included in that final language, including language that would obviate the need for our waiver that would make all systems involved youth categorically eligible for services, whether they're in school or not. We included language allowing for provisional enrollment of young people so that they aren't turned away from programs without documentation. They can be enrolled for up to 40 days while the program secures the documentation they need to verify their eligibility. We worked on stronger planning requirements to be implemented both at the local and state board level to make sure that OY are not just listed in the state plan, but there are specific strategies for serving them. And then we secured funding for a new federal youth apprenticeship program called the Youth Apprenticeship Readiness Grants. It was largely modeled after the program we started here in California. So we're very invested in those 4 things getting across the finish line, and we're going to keep advocating with congressional leadership to make sure that WIOA gets reauthorized in the first half of this year. We also launched last year the first national congressional caucus on opportunity youth. We were surprised that there was no OY caucus before. There's caucuses on a lot of different issues. So we helped launch that with some national partners last year. We are working on recruiting a new Republican co-chair for that caucus because the Republican who was chairing it last Congress lost her reelection. And we're going to be working on recruiting new members to join the caucus, as well as rolling out some content in terms of some public briefings in the first half of 2025 to raise awareness about OY issues in Congress and to build new champions. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at the AmeriCorps program, partnering with one of our network members, iFoster, to expand their Opportunity Pathways programs within AmeriCorps in several states, making sure that that program is structured and funded in a way that it can be accessible to opportunity youth to help them develop experience and skills and exit the program very job ready. So those are the federal policy agenda priorities for 2025. And that's the content we have for today in terms of where the state budget is at, where the policy survey informed our work, and what our work is going to look like for the rest of the year at the state and federal level. Happy to answer any questions that folks have, or open it up to any of our members for any feedback or thoughts.
This is Frank Alvarez with Youth Build Charter School of California. Yeah, thank you for the updates. Very, very important and helpful during these uncertain times. Couple just ideas regarding the advocacy piece, because always looking for ways to engage our young people in the advocacy, and it's good that the support's there to move them along. Social media, just we do a lot with young people on social media throughout our sites and with our partners. even though that, when appropriate, if you feel like that could help the push or just create a space for young people, definitely would love to support any of that. We also do delegations to Sacramento. So if there's anything that's out there that we can support, please keep us updated so that when our young people go up there, they could speak upon those bills as well. Um, yeah, just wanted to share that and thank you for the information around CTE, including opportunity youth within these workforce initiatives, because that's who we're all here for.
Kelly, you have your hand up?
Hi, I'm fairly new to Unite LA. I started about a month ago, and accordingly, I'm a little bit getting familiarized with WIOA. But coming from the early warning and care space prior to this, we were having conversations about the Child Care Development Block Grant, and given the current administration strategically not pushing for reauthorization just because we don't want to open up policy conversations and risk rolling back things. And so I wanted to just get further insight on the strategy of pushing for reauthorization. It sounds like there's been a lot of momentum building. So I guess my question is like, is there any concern about pushing for reauthorization at this moment? Or does that, seem like the best course of action given everything?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if we were starting from scratch, we might have a different perspective on this. I think given that through an election year, during campaign season, the House and the Senate and the Republican and Democratic parties all were able to come to agreement on language, funding levels. I think that was pretty tremendous work. Workforce tends to not get too partisan. I mean, you say that until we start talking about funding levels. Um, it was also weird that last year, at the same time that a lot of Republicans were invested in reauthorizing WIOA, in the budgeting process, they tried to zero out the WIOA youth program. So you have some inconsistencies in terms of the policy direction the Republican Party has taken. But I think, what we're seeing is that agreement that we really liked at the end of last year is the starting point for now. They're not ripping it up. They're not looking to relitigate it things. We have heard some, there's a lot of conversation at the federal level about terminology and word choice. And so we have heard they might not like the term opportunity youth right now. And so it's possible there needs to be some changing in messaging and terminology, but I don't get the sense that there is a real pushback in terms of eligibility, in terms of the language that was agreed upon. So I think the risk is low. I think because it made it so far in the process and everyone sort of signed off on it, I think our hope is that they'll just take it up and they're not talking about doing a committee process again and relitigating the decisions that were made. I mean, they're talking about taking last year's text and putting it on the floor and just passing it out. So I think the risk is lower in WIOA than it would be for some of those other reauthorizations you're talking about.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Uh, looks like Javon and Kevin, I don't know who was first.
Javon.
All right, I'll go. If you was gonna jump in there, Kevin, I was gonna give you the floor. Um, so I know I heard about the language stuff. We got to worry about that now more than ever and be strategic about that. My question is, has there been any thought or discussion on a opportunity, and I'm gonna also say resilient youth caucus in California?
At the state legislature?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. We haven't started the work around that yet. It's something we certainly could do. The caucuses are less common than at the state level than they are at the federal level. At the federal level, there are caucuses for all kinds of things. The state level caucuses um, are rarer and seem to spring up and then disappear, and they seem to be less like continually active. But it is a good idea, and it is something, we could look at. I mean, I think it's I think caucuses are useful because they create a forum to organize work and to organize advocacy and also to build champions. So I'm open to looking at it. And if you guys at CCY are interested in, helping us plan and design that, it's certainly something we could look at for this year.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Kevin?
Curious about the state budget, Sean, with the uncertainty and things like education funding and healthcare funding for the state. Do you have a sense where if the state lost, some substantial federal funding of what they'd want to prioritize to backfill and what implications that might have on the things we care about? I know it's some tea leaves that I'm asking you to read, but I
Yeah.
think there could be some
I wish
dramatic.
I had that kind of access.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, so there's so much uncertainty at the federal level right now. I mean, legally, under the Impoundment Act, the president is allowed to temporarily freeze programs after notifying Congress. But even then, it's usually limited to 90 days, and they can only freeze certain types of programs. So they can freeze discretionary funding, but not entitlement funding. That said, like, what's legally allowable and what this administration are doing in a lot of cases are not necessarily aligned. And so it's hard to anticipate. I mean, they put out that funding freeze, they pulled it back immediately. They have not reissued anything yet, although I think people are bracing for another one. And then it's just hard to say how long it would take the courts to intervene, how comprehensively they would intervene. In some ways, this is already being fought out with the foreign aid stuff. So we can look at that and see how the courts might respond to a funding freeze. But like, look at the impact on foreign aid, even just by delaying it with questionable legality, it causes massive downstream impacts. And so I would be very worried. In their initial funding freeze memo, WIOA was on there. And that would be catastrophic for the workforce system. That could mean contractors aren't getting paid. That could mean um, the workforce system ceases to operate for a while. It's hard to know, but again, they're supposed to provide justification to Congress before they do anything. They didn't do that the first time. They're not supposed to be able to touch entitlement programs, although entitlement programs were on their initial list. So we're just kind of in the void here, where it's really hard to anticipate what's even going to come out of the federal level, let alone what the courts are going to say about it and how the state's going to react. I think, the biggest catastrophe for state budgets would be if they did try to put a hold on any entitlement programs like Medi-Cal or programs like that that are, critical to the state's fiscal health. That could cross over and have budgetary implications across programs. So I don't sympathize with the legislature trying to craft a budget in this environment. It's going to be a really challenging year. I mean, the state has put aside reserves, over the last several budget cycles for fiscal uncertainty and emergencies, but $17 billion isn't going to last long if they cut off major federal funding programs.
Thanks for your tea leaves reading.
Frank?
Yes. So during the Biden administration, the Department of Labor in um their RFPs, they asked us to include how we're going to implement DEI and what our practice for that. And then in all the reports I've written over the last 4 years, I've had to speak to how DEI was being diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, how all that was being done. Um, yeah, I mean, this is another thing you might, again, asking to read the tea leaves, son, but just curious to know, have you gotten any insight on that? What's going to happen with these grants that already been given, whose life cycle now moves into this new presidency and its priorities? And yeah, like, are they going to ask folks to take out a DEI? Are any green building practices or environmental justice practices within it? Um,
Yes, they definitely are
yeah,
going to ask that. I don't know how much that you've written is publicly available to them. They're also accessing systems that they're not supposed to be legally accessing, so there's that. Um, I mean, I think the worst case scenario here is that they take a really wide net and say anything, any federal grant that has DEI referenced in it, and they're using AI and tools like that to do really fast scanning across publicly available documents. I think my worry is that the next funding freeze will cast a net like that and put a hold on those types of grants, and potentially disrupt funding. Now, again, they're not legally allowed to do that forever, and there is a congressional notification process here, and then they have to release the funds after 90 days. But it could still be extremely disruptive.
thank you for that. Yeah,
Are you
looking forward
getting
to the updates
any
so I can
are
prepare.
you getting any advice from like the Youth Build National on any of this stuff? What are they conveying to their members?
We got a call tomorrow, an advocacy call tomorrow to go over it. A lot of it has just been same information you've been sharing. Just we're learning right now, not much to share.
Mhm.
You know, a month ago we're all focused on the freeze and what to do then, and so yeah, we're all just kind of being patient right now and trying not to be overwhelmed with everything and just really be strategic in what we have to do. But we have an advocacy call taking place tomorrow regarding youth build. You know, what we've heard is that, you know, there's still bipartisan support for youth build. There's still bipartisan support for WIOA. There definitely was a language shift to expand opportunity youth, that it no longer just be for out of school youth. They wanted to be more expansive and inclusive of all young people. And that was coming from the Republicans, which no, there was no resistance to that. Like, yeah, like, you know, so I think there is going to be some changing in that in terms of WIOA. Yeah.
So does the Youth Build federal funding, it passes through the state, right? And do you get that allocated annually or does it come quarterly? It's not reimbursement based, right?
No, so with Youth Build, it's so WIOA. It's federal funding coming through WIOA, so
Yeah.
it has to move through the both houses, the Congress and the Senate.
Yeah.
There's always bipartisan support for it, you know. But then those grants go out and they're open essentially to any nonprofit, right? Like you don't have to be an affiliate of Youth Build Global to receive that grant money. Any nonprofit, any WIOA provider, community college can go after the funds and be able to operate a youth build program while they have the grant. Um, yeah.
Okay. Well, so Congress is currently 6 months into this fiscal year and still hasn't finished the budget. The current budget is supposed to be finished by March 14th. It's to be determined if they'll actually finish it by then. That final agreement would include the top line funding level for Youth Build nationally, for fiscal year 2026. But what I would be worried about then is that, that money then goes to Department of Labor and then goes out, that they might hold it at DOL for a while. So I think, I don't think there's risk of them clawing back anything that you have right now, but I would be worried about disruptions in the timeliness of receiving your next round of grants, basically.
Yeah. I'll just share this real quick. Lori Chavez, the mayor,
Mhm.
she is a conservative from Oregon, and there are local youth build programs in her area. And the local youth build program has shared that she's always been a friend. That she's always been a friend of WIOA, of workforce development. Um, so if that offers any hope to folks around who's going to head up DOL next, yeah.
Yeah. She seemed to be among the among the less radioactive appointees, but that said, some of these decisions are not happening at the agencies, they're happening at the budget office. and then they have to be implemented across the agencies. So the worry would be that OMB, the President's Budget Office, is the one dictating decision making here, and she's forced to implement it, because I don't think she's interested in putting holds like that. Any other questions? Anybody else have anything else they want to share with the group or with COYN for our work ahead in this unpredictable times? All right.
Nothing to share. Just want to say thank you, Sean, as always, for your leadership and the information in this space. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
And this is Lori. I just wanted to thank everyone who signed on so quickly. We had over 80 organizations sign on to support the reauthorization of WIOA. So thanks to everyone on this call who quickly signed on to support that.
All right. Be well, everyone. We'll be in touch. Reach out anytime. And yeah, keep trucking in 2025. Here we go.
Yeah.
Thank you, COYN. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate you.
Bye.
Great call. Thank you.
Thank you.